Hello, everybody. My name is Mitch Butler, and I've made these videos before, but it's been a while, so I thought I would. We've all been trapped in the house here lately, so we're getting back out now. We're playing some gigs, and over this time, I thought it was a good idea to make a couple more videos, and I wanted to start with one that I thought that everybody could relate to, and I want to talk about the blues. And in particular, the kind of blues that we hear when we go to a jazz jam session. I've seen it on YouTube and the internet called jazz blues. And yeah, that's an apt description because of the chord progressions that's used in this is maybe a little different than, say, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, that kind of thing. I thought I would start with this video, and it's actually going to come in three parts. And the first part I want to talk about is blues improvisation basics. And so, I know that, when you first start venturing into this, um, we hear a lot about the blues scale, and we're going to talk about that. But I want to start with some concepts that actually are a little more solid in their foundation than the blues scale. This first part, I'm going to focus on guide tones and basic motivic movement. And so, what do we mean by guide tones? Really, we're talking about a couple of notes in the chord structure that we see most often. And the most useful guide tones are going to be the third of the chord and the seventh of the chord. And so if we're playing a B flat blues, which is what I'll concentrate on in this video, we're talking about from the very first chord, the D of the B flat 7 chord, and the A flat of the B flat 7 chord. Those two notes are the notes that sort of give us the direction, the purpose, the chord, hence the term guide tones. So, what I think is most useful when really trying to learn how to play the blues is to be able to play those two tones for the chords that are happening at the time. So, in the B flat blues chord progression, we can see it up here. We'll see that D and the A flat will be in the first chord. So our first chord is B flat 7. So, and those two tones. And they really give us, as I said before, the structure of the chord. But in the next measure, we often will see the 4 chord flash its pretty head for one measure. So in the second measure, we'll have the E flat 7. Now, if we look at the third and the seventh, those chords, we'll see that the third is G and the seventh is D flat. Well, if we flip those two, we'll find out that D flat, which is the seventh of the E flat chord, is a half step below the D, which is the third of the first chord of the B flat 7 chord. And then we'll see that the G is a half step lower than the A flat that occurs in the first measure. So rather than think about them jumping a fourth, those two pitches jumping a fourth, think about them as linear partners. And so if we can use those two pitches, we'll find ourselves playing some pretty linear stuff on the blues, just with those two tones, the third and the seventh, or the 4 tones in total, the D, D flat, A flat, and G, from measure 1 and 2 respectively. And then you'll see in measure 3 and 4, we go back to the 1 chord, so we're going to go back to those 2 tones. So let me just play a little bit of that. I've got a little play along here that I'll just play the guide tones with. And I'll start with the third of the B flat and the seventh of the E flat. That's D and D flat. And just play that so you can hear it. Okay, here we go. Then, of course, when we get to the fifth measure, we go back to that 4 chord. So we're going to go back to that D flat, which again is the seventh of the E flat chord. We stay there for, we're going to call it 2 measures, although we'll also see in the sixth measure, in the fifth measure, we'll see E flat 7, and the sixth measure, we'll often see E diminished 7. Don't want to get too far into that right now because we're going to talk about that chord a little bit more in the next video. But do realize that the D flat is also the diminished 7th of E diminished 7 chord, arpeggio. So E flat, and then E diminished. So it's the same tone and it functions the same way. And those 2 chords are very closely related. Again, you talk about that some other time, but realize that that D flat is the 7th in both those chords. So this guide tone thing will last us for at least 6 bars, right? Well, it also lasts us into the 7th bar because the 7th bar goes into B flat 7 again. And so we're going to go back to our D. All right. And then we have the 8th bar. Now, I will spend more time on the 8th bar in the second video. But let's just call that 7th bar G7. Okay. So our third of G7th will be B. And so we want to play a B concert in that 8th bar. Okay. Again, we will talk more about this one later on. So I'm going to play the first 8 bars now, starting on that D guide tone. So, all right, we can hear that we're just guiding through the chord changes here. All right. Then when we get to bars 9 and 10, we have what we call a 2-5 in B flat, right? Call it a 2-5 because the chord is C minor, which is the second pitch of B flat. It's a 2 chord, C minor 7. And then we have a 5 chord, dominant again. And our third is A. Well, that A in the F chord is a half step below the 7th of the 2 in the 2 chord. And so that note is B flat. So very much like we had in the 1 to 4 relationship, we have to this 2-5 relationship, where one of those 7th or 3rds will go down a half step and become the opposite in the next chord. And so B flat to A is our guiding movement in this 2-5. All right. I could very well flip it, and we're going to in a moment. But let's just stick with that one because the A is the 3rd of the 5 chord, and it really is our leading tone back to B flat, the root of the 1 chord that is the first chord in the 11th bar. Okay, so why don't I just play that? And before I play it, I'll say this. The 11th and 12th bar is nothing more than what we call the turnaround. It is leading us back to 1 again, a repeat of bars 8, 9, 10, and we're just going to do very much the same thing. Play leading tones, or guide tones, I should say. Playing guide tones over that 11th and 12th bar as well. So let's hear that. 7 and 8, bar 9. We're back at the top. Okay, so now I'll just play all 12 bars, and you'll hear the guide tones from the first bar all the way through the 12th bar. All right, putting it all together, so to speak. Here we go. So now I've taken the original third of the one chord, that D in the B flat chord, right? Let's now take the A flat in that that B flat 7 chord and the 1 chord. Again, the next bar is E flat. The third of that chord is a G, down a half step from the 7th. All right, A flat to G. And basically, I'm just using the other tone. When we get to bar 5, you'll hear the G again. When we get to bar 8, I'll play an F, because the F is the 7th of G7. All right. So I'll play the F instead of the B. And then when I get to bar 9, I will play the E flat, which is the third of the 2 chord, instead of the B flat, which is the 7th. And then I'll keep that E flat, because in bar 10, F7, the 7th is E flat. Now, the only thing is, when you're going from a minor chord to a dominant chord, your 7th goes down a half step, becomes the third of the 5 chord, but the third of the 2 chord stays the same and becomes the 7th of the 5 chord. Okay, so, but that's in 2/5. That's from minor to dominant. When we go dominant to dominant, that's when we have both notes going down a half step. So let's listen to what that sounds like when I use the other guide tone through the chorus. Okay, here we go. So forth and on. In the turnaround, I kind of missed that. That's what I should have played. We can hear those guiding motions both when we start on the 3rd in the 1st chord, or the 7th in the 1st chord of the form. Let's see what happens when we play with the 2. We mix and match the 2. See if we can make something happen here. Okay. I'll start on the D. So what do you think? To me, it starting to sound like something that we may have heard or resemble, um, a semblance of the kind of thing that we would want ourselves to sound like. And that's because, folks, the thing about jazz improvisation is we're trying to build melodies that are manipulating chord structures that are folding in and out amongst themselves throughout the movement of these harmonies, and especially in standards and the blues. Older forms of songs that use these movements where the roots move up in fourths or down by fifths. C to F to B flat to E flat to A flat to D flat to G flat to B, E, A, D, G, and back around to C again. In those movements that move that way, these guide tones are in the chords that are folding in and out amongst themselves. I really recommend that a lot of you go and check out the Jazz Piano book, written by the late, great Mark Levine. It's a good book with really plain spoken language, and most importantly, written examples of the things that you're learning in the book from recordings, and so you can reference the recordings for the things that he's talking about. So I really recommend that book. But the reason I say that is because he takes you through really simple chord voicings for horn players, drummers, bass players, people who do not play piano or guitar, where you can see the chord movements. But our job is, to make melody is to use those movements to create good melody. So that's why just using those guide tones are really, really good ways to start to build really, competent, comprehensive solos while avoiding, what we call skating over the changes, where you're, playing something that kind of sort of fits but doesn't really use the folding and the motion of the notes and the chords that lead us from one place to another. Now, what I'd like to do is sort of take this to another step here, where using the same chord progression and framework, we start to look at some very simple, what we call motivic motivic development here, using very simple, what we call motives or motifs, or melodic fragments that utilize these movements in the guide tones inside those motivic structures. Okay, and this is where we start to build even more of a comprehensive, competent, solo structure. So if we take something simple like right, if we take that, we want to be able to take that through, these chord movements here. Now, there's two ways to look at this. We can look at it where we have these three notes, and in these three notes, we're using 1, 2, and 3. All right. Right. So that 3 is going to tell us that, okay, 1, we could go 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. I think 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. I think that's what I did there. Right. We can use that in B flat. We can use it in E flat. We can use it in G in the 8th bar, and we can use it in C minor, the 9th bar, and F7 or F in the 10th bar. All right. And just use it strictly 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1 in those keys. So we can use it that way. Another way that we can look at it, though, is thinking about it in terms of guide tones, right? This is where we introduce the concept of mode mixture. What mode mixture is in its purest definition is not that important. What's most important is that we can look at that first use of tones and then adjust those tones instead of what we call sequencing, what we just did. We can look at it where we use the same pitches and adjust for the key signature of the chord that's occurring. Okay? So the first is B flat, C, D. Those are the first 3 tones. That works fine in B flat 7. When we get to E flat 7, remember our D is going to come down a half step, become the D flat, the 7th of the E flat chord. So we can use the D flat in those 3 pitches instead of the D natural in that chord. Okay. When we get to G7, there is no B flat in G7. There's a B, right? So we just adjust the key signature. There's no B flat in G7, but there's a B. So B, C, D, and B. Then when we get to C minor, that's the same key signature as B flat major, because we used the 2 of B flat, right? So B flat, C, and D. All right. When we get to the F, instead of playing B flat, C, and D, which would work, I'm going to adjust it so that I'm playing that 3rd of F. If you remember when we played the 7th of C and then went down a half step and played the A of F, it sounded really good. We're going to do the same thing here, and we're going to use the A instead of the B flat because it's the 3rd of the chord. All right, and that 3rd is really important. We talked about that, right? So I will do that, and we call this, again, mode mixture. All right, so it sounds something like this. And that gives us what we would like to hear in a good solo. We have something we can gravitate to. Right? We can gravitate to that motif, that lick. That'd be another word that we would hear. We can gravitate to that lick. All right? And we can use it to be literal. I like to think of it as literal and interpretive, right? Where literal is the sequencing. Right? or interpretive, where we have this idea, but we just don't adjust it for whatever's happening in the chord. Right? Let's play through that. And what I'll do is I'll just keep around that idea and just adjust either for the scale degrees, that is the sequencing, 1, 2, 3, 1 in the particular keys, or I'll do some mode mixture. Okay, let's see what it sounds like through a couple of choruses. I'll also throw in some guide tones where I'm getting away from that motif, and I'll land on some tones that will guide us again through the chord structure. Let's see what it sounds like. So we can hear where that motif is what we're gravitating to, and we're making the adjustments based on the guide tones that we figured out here. You also heard at the end, I probably threw in an extra guide tone or two, and it was just the fifth or the root of the chord. Okay. I don't think I actually used the root, if I can remember correctly, but I wanted to really badly a couple of times. And those roots are okay. I know I heard when I was first starting out that never play the root of the chord. Why not? I mean, I know the why not, but when we're trying to figure this thing out, why not? Okay. And that's important when we're trying to figure things out. If we know that something is solid, like the root of a chord, then certainly, why not? Okay. Now, don't say why not. Why can't I use the major seventh over a dominant seventh chord? There's ways to use it, but the why not is a lot more convincing. I could explain to you why not, but most importantly, your ears will tell you why not. So, practice that. And there's so many tools to use. I use YouTube all the time. I know the guitar improvisation, the learn jazz standards, and so many others that are on YouTube. But you can also use I Will Be and so forth. So give it a try. And I'd like for you to give it a try and try to avoid the crutch that we're going to talk about here now. So I use a term that has lots of negative connotations. I use the term crutch. And so you probably know about this crutch already, heard it referred to as a crutch, but you've also heard it referred positively as a crutch as well, and that is the blues scale. So let's talk about the blues scale for a moment, and only for a moment. I don't want to talk about it too long. Let's talk about why it works first. So the reason it works is because it was constructed as a tool when in the infancy of jazz pedagogy and education, 50 years or more ago now. Yeah, longer than that ago now. The reason it works is because it contains some pitches that sort of outline the things that you might have heard in some blues recordings from the early part of the 20th century and the mid part of the 20th century. And then, I guess theoretically speaking, it utilizes terms that have been sort of misnomers. Blue notes. Blue notes had been sort of distilled down to a definition that's not really accurate, which was the lowered third over a dominant chord, the lowered fifth over a dominant chord, the lowered seventh over a dominant chord, which actually fits the chord, but the other two do not fit the chord. And those pitches have enough tension in them on their own that it really gives a distinct characteristic to what's happening. So when we hear a B flat 7, so B flat, D flat, E flat, E natural, F, A flat, and B flat is the B flat blues scale. So, when we hear that over a blues, it has a certain sound. So let's hear what that sounds like. Just the blues scale over the blues. You can hear in there really compelling, tension to release in there. And so, yeah, it works. And no matter whether I was in the B flat 7 to E flat 7, even in the G7, the C minor to the F7, it really works because we're going back to 1 in the chord structure. And so this scale really emphasizes the 1 and the lowered 7 to the 5 or the lowered 7 to the 1. I mean, you hear that depending on which direction you're going. So it sounds fine in and of itself. But there's also moments where that tension to release never gets to really happen because I avoid the actual consonants of the chord, which is the chord tones during the chord. And so there's moments where you could really find resonance there. But if we just stick to that blues scale, we'll never really reach those moments of resonance. Let's play some more, and then I'll play where we could resolve it to chord tones, and it gives it a much more rich sound and a much more directional and intentional sound. So let's check that out. Very clear moments where you get that lower third over the B flat, but then you play the third of the B flat. It gives it a really nice direction. And then if we play just the blues scale, we're leaving out tones that sound good over the blues. The third of the E flat chord in the fifth and sixth bar, it's a really important sound to get. All right. And again, we're going to talk more about some of these important moments, but I'll just again point out measure 8. You have the G7. There's a B in that chord. But if you just stick to the blues scale, you're never going to really get to the resonant sound of the consonant note, B natural. And then the 2-5 to the C minor to F some. Right? I can still play that bluesy sound, but it sounds really nice when you go from the 2 to the 5 chord and you play the actual chord tones of those measures. So the blues scale can be a crutch that hinders your musical growth, and so I recommend kind of ditching it for a while. All right, but I think you can come back to it after you accomplish learning the guide tones, being able to guide yourself through those guide tones, and then playing simple motifs, licks, ideas, patterns that use the guide tones in those 2 ways we talked about, sequencing and mode mixture. Okay. And then when you do come back to the blues scale, add the tones that aren't in there. For instance, again, the 6th of B flat, the G, which is also the third of the 4 chord, the E flat chord, and the 9 of the B flat, the C in the B flat, which is the 6th of the E flat, which means it's probably going to sound pretty good too. Let's try that. Let's play some blues scale stuff, but we're going to add the G and the C. Last 2 tones, 9 and 6, right? So you can hear the B flat, the blues scale is very limiting, and the sooner you can get away from it, the sooner you can come back to it with some depth and direction to where you want to go. And so, it really is useful to really dive inside these chords. And again, it's useful to be able to sit down on the piano, even if you play all of these chords in root position. Block chords, B flat 7, bum, 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 just play them from the root, and then the E flat and the root. It's still very useful so that you can see it. But then try to figure out those 3rd and 7th motions, just the 3rd and the 7th, on your horn, on your axe. That's not a multiphonic axe. And on the piano or guitar. Okay, and see if you can start to build, your confidence and build really directional, intentional solos over the blues form. All right, that's it for this first video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and please feel free to leave your comments and below. If you like what you see here, or you like some of the other videos on the channel, please like this video and subscribe and turn on your notifications so that we can stay in touch when I release the second video. Playing the important moments in the blues is the second video, and then there'll be a third part as well. All right, thanks so very much. This is Mitch Butler. We'll see you all soon.